Hey everyone, Tom here. Before we get into this week's episode of Device Talks Weekly, I wanted to share a bit of a conversation I had with Mark Weed. Mark's the chair of the Division of Engineering at the Mayo Clinic, and he's going to be moderating a panel for us on Device Talks Tuesdays, which is coming up this Tuesday on May 19th. Device Talks Tuesdays is our new program to bring the conversations from our Device Talks meetings to you. It's part of our Device Talks at Work program. So wherever you're working, whether it's in your bedroom, your basement, your dining room table, we want to bring leaders to you. And we want you to be able to connect with them as well. This is not going to be another podcast. This will be what I like to call a connected conference, a webinar, where you will have the opportunity to talk to Mark and the other distinguished panelists from the Mayo Clinic about how they're bringing patients back to Mayo, or what they're doing to get their patients back. Let's listen to this clip from Mark.
Now, instead of preparing for the surge, we're trying to figure out how do we bring elective procedures back, right? You can't delay those things forever, both financially and from a patient standpoint, right? Patients need to be seen and treated. Conditions progress. So now the focus is how do we bring patients in, but make sure that our patients are safe from each other and that our staff are safe as well.
Well, that's great. I hope you'll join us on Tuesday at our Device Talks Tuesdays meeting. It's happening at 4 p.m. Eastern. You can go to devicetalks.com to register. You can register for this one or any of the Device Talks Tuesday meetings that we'll have up there. There's 4 up there right now. We're adding more every week, so you'll see some more up there. These are free to you. We just want you to be part of the Device Talks community going forward. So go to Device Talks Tuesday, register, and I hope to talk to you directly on May 19th. All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
Hey everyone, this is Tom Salemi. Welcome back to episode 10 of Device Talks Weekly. Very grateful to have you here. Grateful to everyone who's been part of this program. We have had great support from the medtech industry. We'd love some more. If you're enjoying these podcasts, please do share them. I know every podcast person says that, but it would be very helpful for us if more people were listening. The more the better the guests, the better the content. So please, we really would appreciate your support. That's enough begging. I want to tell you a little bit about this week's episode before we get into our conversation with Chris Newmarker, Executive Editor of Life Sciences at Mass Device and Medical Design and Outsourcing. We talked today with a couple of investors. One is Justin Klein. Justin previously had been a partner at NEA, New Enterprise Associates, where he did really well investing in medtech startups. He left NEA last year and joined with Kirk Nielsen, formerly of Versant, to form Vensana Capital. Vensana Capital is a firm that is based, Kirk is in Minneapolis. Justin is on the East Coast near DC, but they invest nationally in medtech companies, and they're really looking at companies of all stages. And the two of them have done well for their previous firms, so expectations are high for Vensana. I talked with Justin a bit about how he is investing in this climate, what the changes to the world have meant for medtech startups, for folks trying to raise capital, for VCs who are trying to invest capital, how valuations have been impacted, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll get into that conversation in just a moment. Then I talked with Duke Rohlen. Duke is a very successful entrepreneur, has sold several companies to startup companies, to larger companies like Covidian. He's generated billions in sales from these companies, or these companies have been sold for billions. So Duke clearly knows what he is doing. He now is chairman of Ajax, which is a holding company that has invested in several therapeutics and services companies. So we'll talk with Duke more as an operational person about how they have worked during the pandemic, what changes have they made, what has happened to their clinical trials, what has happened to their workforce. He brings interesting perspective because, again, they invest both in services and therapeutics. And we'll wrap up that conversation talking a bit about the state of employment. Duke has some, what I thought was really terrific advice for people who are looking for their next opportunity. So before we get into those conversations, I want to hear what's up with my friend Chris Newmarker of Mass Device. All right, we're here with Chris Newmarker, Executive Editor of Life Sciences at WTWH Media, aka Mass Device and MDO. Chris, this is episode number 10. Can you
Woohoo!
believe it?
Hey, time flies by when you're having fun.
I think you're officially a podcaster now, so update that LinkedIn profile.
All right, sounds good.
So this has been an interesting week, an interesting couple of months, obviously, in medtech. But I think one of the more interesting dynamics has been the industry's relationship with the FDA, which has been very generous with issuing of EUAs for good reason. We needed tests,
Right.
and we needed treatments. But this week it seems like there's been sort of a kind of a applying of the brakes a bit. What's happening on the diagnostics front?
Probably the big thing is that there's been all kinds of alarms raised about the antibody tests that have been rolling out. FDA took a lot of criticism initially over diagnostic tests. There was criticism that the tests were too slow to roll out as the pandemic was starting, and so now they're getting criticized for the whole other side of it, that they've got like a House subcommittee and the American Medical Association and independent scientists saying, hey, there's too many antibody tests that flooded the market that are performing poorly or inconsistently, and so now they told companies selling the test to submit validation information, and then within a few days we had BD that had been touting a test back in March that then turned around and pulled it from the market. So they're holding off until they can get a next generation test out there. This is a test that they've been working on with Biomedomics. So kind of like increase of regulation of the antibody test. For good reason. We want accurate tests so that we can like actually really have a grasp of how widespread COVID is in the population,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't want people getting false false positives or false negatives. People would like to know whether they've had it in the past as well. Like they aren't sure how much immunity that would give you, but it could give you maybe at least a little peace of mind you've been through it, I suppose.
And Abbott's test came under a bit of a fire, although Abbott is saying that it wasn't being used properly. What's any takeaway from that exchange this week?
Right, and this was a diagnostic test, like one of and actually a rapid diagnostic. Like there's actually published reports this is the test used in the White House, but there were some NYU researchers that were saying that the test was that was raising some issues about accuracy. Hasn't been published yet, hasn't been peer reviewed. Abbott's kind of fired back and was saying that the researchers weren't using their test properly in the study, but they've been kind of taking some criticism themselves over over diagnostic test accuracy. But I'm sure this is going to be an ongoing issue. Is okay, we had the FDA saying, hey, we need to get tests out, and now the flip side is we're kind of like having to try to increase regulation or do and to try to make sure these things are accurate, because it's just public health officials around the country are just saying this is like one of the really important tools they need to just get things under control as we start reopening our economy.
On the plus side, I thought Sean Woolley had a great article about telehealth, and that's something that we all want to see, I think, or we all want to remain as part of our healthcare options. What was Sean writing about this week?
Well, the really interesting thing is Frost and Sullivan came out with a report about telehealth, and and their big point is that all this need for social distancing right now is really kind of pushed physicians to use telehealth a lot more, and they're saying hey, this could last, that we could see the telehealth market experience sevenfold growth by 2025. So it's always been kind of a slow thing trying to get telehealth going in the US, but this might be it. We might see a lot more virtual visits, remote patient monitoring. It's kind of seems to be a theme of this pandemic overall, that there were like trends that were already happening, and that the pandemic and this terrible recession in some ways, are like kind of pushing those trends like a lot faster than we would have otherwise.
All right, let's take a quick break from this conversation with Chris Newmarker to hear from Justin Klein. As I mentioned at the top, Justin's a co-founder of Vensana Capital, a new medtech venture capital firm. Justin, though, has been investing in medtech for over a decade, so he knows when to invest capital and when not to invest capital. So I really wanted to hear his perspective on how he is viewing investing during this pandemic and after this pandemic. Let's listen. How do you look at your current portfolio, and do you make any changes there? I've talked to people who have said that that funds have been cut, that venture firms or investors have sort of pulled out of fears because they just wanted to hold on to their capital and closed up companies. How did you look at your existing portfolio? I'm not suggesting you did that. And did you make any changes after that internal look?
Well, up front, one of the things that we were frankly just lucky to be in the position we're in is we didn't have a large portfolio of existing companies. So our ability to focus and try to help the small number of companies that we're actively invested in, is something we turn to first. And I think, in each case, it's a little bit different depending on what their objectives were. But, we really thought about how to extend runway, manage the business as efficiently as possible, and frankly, put the companies in a position where, they preserve as much optionality as they can so that week to week or month to month, they can readjust to, opportunities as they present. For example, at Intact Vascular, we're actively growing commercial sales of our TAC product for endovascular disease. And yet what we're observing is that certain pockets of the country are more amenable to doing clinical cases in hospitals versus office-based labs than other parts of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to continue to shift over time, much like we've seen the pandemic and outbreaks, happen on a local basis. And so I think, Intact has developed a commercial playbook that's positioned them really well to be nimble and grow as the opportunities present themselves.
Did you have meetings or calls with all of your CEOs and boards? Did everyone get together to sort of touch base and see where you're at?
Yeah, I think we did. I mean, we of course wanted to think carefully about how we forecast 2020, in light of this new normal, and then how we think about 2021 and the capital that these companies have raised, in order to fund them through to a period where the clouds maybe aren't as dark. And I think even like in the case of Intact, April, was better than we expected, in March. And I expect it's still going to be sort of a month-to-month experience as we all navigate this. But I think increasing communication broadly with the companies, with members of our team, and companies with their customers and other stakeholders has been a key part of developing a good response.
And how about looking externally at new deals? Have you developed a policy where you're not going to make new investments until things become more settled? Are you raising the bar or changing the bar in any way, or just the qualities of the companies you're looking to invest in? Has that changed at all because of the uncertainty connected to the pandemic?
Well, I think that we would argue we always keep a high bar, and I think that is the case. I would say some of our criteria may shift, and some of the ways in which we think about different aspects of a therapy, might play better in an environment like this, and others might see some weaknesses. So, for example, procedures that can happen in the outpatient setting or an ambulatory surgery center may be advantaged over those that require a hospital stay. Similarly, any kind of intervention where local anesthesia is adequate versus general anesthesia and intubation, or a procedure that requires a risk of a prolonged ICU stay for recovery, are all things that I think kind of move down our list a little bit. And the flip of that is, increasingly therapeutic interventions or new ways of providing care that help, manage some of the impact of the conditions that our hospitals and caregivers and patients, frankly, are facing, I think move up the list. From a pace perspective, I think our team has done a really nice job prosecuting, different opportunities. We've been really busy. I'd say though, since early March, we've been as busy as a team and doing new investments as we had ever been in the prior sort of year plus of the firm's history. Some of that was because we were actively engaged with companies that we were getting close to investing in, and so we've closed 2 investments since March. We also just signed up to a term sheet for a third, and that was a project that we initiated, in sort of the later part of March as all this was unfolding. And so I think that, again, we're going to continue to be selective with maybe some tweaks to our criteria. We do think carefully about reserving capital for follow-ons, and we're thinking about how to adjust expectations for milestones and achievement and capital requirements. But fundamentally, I think the companies we're investing in are developing really important innovations to tough problems. A lot of those tough problems are only exacerbated by what's going on with coronavirus. The underlying healthcare issues and needs aren't changing. We just have to make sure that they can be delivered in a way that allows those innovations to have the impact that they need to have.
Great. And just 2 more quick questions. Does the valuation of those deals change at all, or more broadly, someone raising money in May, will they get a lower valuation, or will there be more valuation pressure, we'll say, than there might have been in February?
I think there are going to be changes, right, around valuations and to terms. I think there will.
Okay.
I think it's sort of inevitable. It's not dissimilar to what we saw, in the 2008-2009 period. And we have to remember the dislocations in the market caused by the financial crisis, reverberated for not just a few months, but a few years after there was really stability. It's not to say good things won't happen. I think there's still a significant need for M&A by large medtech companies looking at accessing innovative technologies to grow their businesses. There's clearly a lot of unmet clinical need, and physician appetite for new solutions to these problems has never been stronger. But inevitably, we will see pullbacks in access to capital from sources that were maybe less committed in a difficult time than they had been over the last few years, where we've seen I think a really robust and healthy medical device financing environment. I think ultimately that will impact some valuations and terms, but we haven't seen anything where sort of eyebrow raising terms or valuations are on the table or being talked about in deals.
Nothing punitive. So. And final question, this is just I think the pandemic has exposed the supply side of things, where our materials are coming from, how we're going to continue to make these products in an emergency like this one. Does that trickle down to your level? Are you looking more at how products will be built once they're approved and where those materials come from, or is that really something that you'll leave to either the later version of your company or an eventual acquirer?
Well, I think number one, it's always something we think about. We'd always try to mitigate sole source supplier risk for critical components of any of our technologies. I think in this environment, and maybe because our companies tend to be a little earlier stage in terms of their scale, whether they're doing clinical development or even early stage commercial companies, the volumes that they demand from their customers aren't huge. So we haven't seen any real supply chain disruptions, for example, across the companies we work with. But we definitely think carefully about, what's the risk of that, and particularly as manufacturing becomes global. Transportation is an integral part of how that happens, and that's being compromised right now. We're definitely giving thought to it. Ideally, though, we're also investing in companies that have relatively straightforward, bill of materials and manufacturing, which rolls into a low cost of goods and high gross margins. So to some extent, some of the criteria we prioritize in our investing helps maybe mitigate some of that. But it's for sure a new consideration we've had to elevate.
Excellent. Well, I know you need to go. Justin Klein, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Tom. Always a pleasure.
I now like to hear from Duke Rohlen. Duke, as I mentioned at the top, is a very successful medtech entrepreneur and executive. Just scroll through his LinkedIn profile and see all the companies he has founded and sold. You're talking about EPIX, talking about Spyrox. He was part of Foxholo. He was president of Foxholo when that was sold to EV3, CV Ingenuity. It goes on and on. It's companies that have been acquired for over $1 billion. So Duke knows how to start, run, and sell medtech companies. But this is a unique time. So I was eager to hear how Duke is managing his companies during this time. He's currently the chairman of Ajax, which is a large holding company backed by KKR, the private equity group. So Duke has a lot of companies and projects going on. So his perspective, I thought, was very unique. And as I mentioned at the top, I thought he had some really great advice for folks in medtech. Let's listen. When did this become capital T, capital P, the pandemic, an issue that you knew was going to change your world and how you do business?
We started following it obviously in January and thinking about it very seriously in February. In March, probably about 2 weeks before the shelter in place hit our area, we ended up making a call that we were going to curtail or at least postpone all of our clinical studies because we didn't want our employees going into hospitals, primarily in Europe. So it became real serious for us right at the beginning of March. We have 3 companies in Germany, and Germany was getting hit, as you know, really hard. So it became very real for us right around that time.
I'm curious. I mean, clinical trials are the lifeblood of a company like yours. How difficult was that decision? I mean, obviously your employee safety is number one, but still you're really taking a lot of wind out of your sails by committing to doing that.
Yeah, no, 100%. So everything, financing all the way to the outcomes of everything that you've been working on for years is reliant on getting the clinical validation that comes from clinical trials. So we did not make that decision lightly. We ultimately decided that it was just an inevitability that within a week or 2 weeks, there was going to be a shutdown of these hospitals because of the need for hospitals to be treating COVID patients. And so we got a little bit ahead of it, but I always refer back to what happened in the Tylenol crisis when Tylenol just pulled everything off the market because it was the right thing to do, irrespective of the financial and strategic implications. And for us, it is the right thing to do to keep our employees, which are the lifeblood of our organization, safe. And so as much of a financial challenge as it was, the decision was quite easy in terms of what was the right thing to do for our employees.
That's great. I want to get into the sort of restarting in a moment, but let's again follow chronologically. So you made that decision with the clinical trials. What did you have to do internally to adapt to this new age?
It's interesting. So, one of the things that happens when you're running at 120 miles an hour is you start focusing on the urgent. So you're very reactive to problems that arise based on trying to knock down dominoes as you work towards accomplishing your objectives. In this case, it's clinical trials, et cetera. One of the things that was the blessing, and I think for everybody, it's trying to figure out what are the learning points, what are the blessings that you can find from this. For us, it was the opportunity to slow down and to go from being reactive to focusing on strategic. So really reevaluating, okay, what is the objective of the preclinical programs that we're working on? What is the objective of the clinical programs? What are we trying to really accomplish? And by slowing down and reevaluating at a 30,000 foot level versus being in the weeds at a foot, we were able to say, we should be doing something a little bit differently in one case with that clinical program. On another company, which is a services company that we have, we said, we should be really focusing on profitability right now and figuring out how we could leverage what's going on in in the macro world right now to figure out how we improve profitability. So it's been challenging, but the benefit has been being able to step back, take a breath, look at where we are as a companies, and then recast, potentially reaffirm or recast. Reaffirm some of the programs that we are doing that boom, we checked where we are and we're going in the right direction. recast some companies where, we were focusing really hard on, say, top line growth. It was time to focus on profitability, and we sort of redirected to do that. So it's management wise, it's been incredibly, it's been great because Zoom has become a daily part of our lives, and we're connecting with, tons of employees. I am personally, because I have the time to do it, and because Zoom is enabling me to do it. So that's the benefit of actually the pause that COVID has created.
And how have your companies changed in size? I mean, I'll just be straight out. Have you had to make reductions in workforce like a lot of companies have? Have you had to make any adjustments to again compensate for lower revenues coming in, or a delay in financing because of the suspended clinical trials?
Yeah, so in all the therapeutic companies, we've not made any changes. We run a really capital efficient, lean organizational model. And we also focus from early financing life to making sure that we have the capital committed to get these companies all the way through to value creation inflection point. So we have the money. And so we made the commitment, just like we made the commitment to postpone clinical studies and keep our employees out of hospitals. We early on made the commitment to not fire any employees. So everybody is safe and sound and working hard. With our services company, what we did do is focus on driving profitability by transitioning from a fixed rate to a variable rate, an hourly rate structure. And so we didn't get rid of employees, but we restructured so that they're motivated to work hard and produce, but we're paying for the time that they actually spend. So it's, the objective is to try and do our part to keep people employed and not contribute to the massive unemployment numbers that are going to be plaguing our country for a while. But at the same time, to make sure that we're being smart and prudent from a financial standpoint for the health of each individual organization.
And going back to, talking about those changes, but also the change in process that you talked about earlier, we had the chance to slow down and take the 30,000 foot view. Do you see value in finding a way to continue to do that once things sort of get back into less crisis mode? I don't want to say normal, but is that something that you need that most companies or more companies need to do, is to find a way, build in a way to slow down and really take a look at the long term instead of just maybe just focusing on those shorter term deadlines?
I absolutely think it's critical. So we've implemented changes that to sort of manage through COVID in terms of, Monday and Friday calls, right? Monday we're dealing with operational, Friday we're dealing with strategic, and the force within the organizations to think about the short term and the long term is incredibly important. It's forcing everybody to think about the strategic implications of what they're doing and make sure that there's relevance for their daily activities that tie into the larger strategy. And that's like fundamental to everybody moving in the right direction. I think that, if you were to go to every employee within every one of our companies right now and say, do you understand what you're doing and why what you're doing ties to the larger initiatives and objectives of the organization? Right now, they would say, absolutely. I think 6 months ago, they wouldn't understand the strategic implications of their activities. So absolutely, it's something that has been critical for us during this COVID period of time. But it's an implementation. It's something we implemented that will definitely continue forward. So yes, the answer is yes. We should continue to do that.
And this is something that just came to me, is there a resizing going on? I've talked to a few CEOs, not in therapeutic companies, more services companies like the ones I'm a part of, where they say, all right, we're basically back to where we were in 2016 in terms of revenue and size. and unfortunately in some cases employees, but just everyone seems to be saying, okay, we need to at least this point cut back and resize. Is that an option for companies that you invest in to say, okay, we've lost a couple of years of progress, or is that not acceptable?
I think on the services side, it's inevitable to look at where you go based on what's happened with COVID. However, I think that for us, we look at our ability to retain the top line. We're services companies, so in this case, we're dealing with autistic children. That need and the care that we provide doesn't wane during a period of disruption like COVID has created.
Absolutely.
So it's more fundamental to think about new ways to provide that care. And so we don't expect that we're going to see a regression to, 2 years ago's revenue line. What we're really forcing is a progression to a higher profitability based on the changes that have been required, telehealth versus, in-store, home visits versus in-store, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And the acceptance that has come both from the insurance providers as well as the patients who have now accepted that that's a care paradigm that would previously not have been accepted, or we would never have even tried because we would be worried about the impact it would have on the top line. So there's an acceptance and now sort of a permanence that's associated with different care mechanisms that will impact profitability going forward and hopefully not impact top line revenue.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Final two questions, both sort of forward-looking. Going back to the clinical trial question, how are you looking at restarting those? Is that something that you have a roadmap for yet, or is there still too much uncertainty out there?
No, so we're restarting those. Germany's opening up, and again, most of our studies are being done in Germany and Switzerland. So they're opening up. We're doing it following all of the local and the state and national jurisdictions that are putting out policies. So we're following all the rules, but we are re-engaging in those. And then we're also recommencing the preclinical, a lot of the animal work that's required for our therapeutic companies. That's opening up again. So we're moving forward.
Great. And the last question has to do with employment. As we talked about and hit upon a few times, there's been a reduction in size and in employees in medtech. Excuse me. Many medtechs have had to shed employees. There are folks out there who are looking for work. Some, I'm sure, are feeling discouraged. How would you advise people to approach this time and to find the right next opportunity for them?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I teach a class at Harvard Business School, and when I ask the students in the class how many people want to be entrepreneurial, everybody raises their hand. Okay, and then when I go back and do an assessment of how many people went into entrepreneurship roles, usually it's 1 out of 90, 2 out of 90. This COVID opportunity allows for people, in my opinion, to assess, are they employees or are they entrepreneurs? And we've had a sustained and will continue to have a sustained period of time where you can do your own scientific experiment on yourself. If you're a person who can figure out that you can create, a charter for yourself and then on a daily basis work towards that without having a lot of accountability and without having a lot of input, and realize something from that experience. And it's easy to do for a day. It's hard to do for 30 days. It's almost impossible to do for 90 days, but that's what entrepreneurship is. It's this very interesting time for people to really say, what is my personality suited for? Is it suited for doing something entrepreneurial, or is it suited for working in a company? I don't think it's a hard time to get a job, and because people are not worrying about bringing new people on. They're thinking about obviously contracting and trying to save money. So I would not say it's opportune time to go out and look for a job. I do think it's a great time to really try on what do you want the next 10 years of your life to be? So to get away from the urgent and start thinking a little bit about the strategic from a personal standpoint, and see if you can live in that discomfort, which is obviously the discomfort that an entrepreneur lives with every day.
Yep, that's a great point. And then sometimes these are the moments where we don't have a lot of other options that we're really able to choose the right one that's available to us. So
that's exactly right, Tom.
That's great advice. Okay, always a pleasure talking to you, Duke. Thank you for the time.
Hey, Tom. Yeah, we'll be in touch. Thanks.
Well, that's a wrap for this episode, our 10th episode of Device Talks Weekly. Chris, where can folks find you on social media?
Oh, they can find me on Twitter @newmarker, just like a new marker. I'm on LinkedIn, and they can also reach me cnewmarker@wtwhmedia.com.
Okay, and you can find me on Twitter. I am @medtech Tom. I'm on LinkedIn, Tom Salemi, and of course, send me an email if you want to connect directly. T Salemi, that's SALEMI @wtwhmedia.com. Please do share these podcasts. We're very happy with the number of listeners we've had listening to the first 10. We'd love to have even more over the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. So please share this. And when you do, link to Chris and or myself. We'd love to be part of that conversation. So that's a wrap. Tune in next time. We'll have another great episode of Device Talks Weekly for you.
Thanks a lot. Stay safe.